European military personnel are arriving in Greenland in what's being called a show of support for its sovereignty. The White House says none of that changes the U.S. position.
I don't think troops in Europe impact the president's decision-making process, nor does it impact his goal of the acquisition of Greenland at all.
Well, the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, says the first team of French soldiers is in place, with more to be deployed in the coming days. This comes one day after representatives from Denmark and Greenland met with U.S. officials in Washington. And after that meeting, the Danish foreign minister said there was a fundamental disagreement with the U.S. over the future of Greenland. Well, Kerry Buck is a former Canadian ambassador to NATO, and she's either going to calm me down or confirm my fears. Kerry Buck, it's good to see you. I mean, how should we be feeling about this? The U.S. has not changed since we last spoke. What do you make of Denmark setting what some people are calling a military tripwire with these deployments here?
Well, I'd be mildly worried, but I think the order of the day is to calm down. There's been a history of military exercises over the last few years by NATO or by allied nations in the Arctic, including in Greenland, and this is part of, the same trend. The biggest exercise in Greenland was held last September, much larger than the exercise that is going on this weekend. That one was led by Denmark, involved roughly the same Europeans, with over 550 troops, frigates, helicopters, air-to-air refueling. And the whole point of it is to send, primary point is to send a message to Russia. Why? Because there's been worry for a while that Russia could establish a choke point in what's known as the Guyuk Gap, but it's Greenland, Iceland, UK Gap. And that's that transatlantic shipping and communications route where if Russia were able to deny NATO allies freedom of movement in that area or disrupt our communications or shipping supply lines, that wouldn't be a good thing. So NATO's been looking at that part of the Arctic as well as the broader Arctic, and doing more exercising to primarily to deter Russia. That being said, for sure, there's an ancillary unspoken message being sent to the U.S. The way the allies are framing it is they're saying our message to the U.S. is that NATO's got this. We can protect Greenland from any security threats coming from outside, like Russia. So this undercuts Trump's rationale for wanting to take over Greenland. Third order unspoken message maybe is that Trump should change his risk calculus because the Europeans are there, but really no one's going to say that out loud, and it really can't be the primary purpose because NATO's been and allies have been doing this in and around Greenland for the last at least 10 years.
Right. Well, yeah, and this is what, when I was talking to Canadian officials about this yesterday, I'm like, what's going on here? And they've talked about these being normal, regular scheduled missions. They're saying we're not planning any new military operations in Greenland. But then, the president of France is talking about a new colonialism. That's not in reference to Russia, right? And it just seems as if NATO, after agreeing to everyone to spend more, there is a fraying here, just because we saw the foreign ministers walk out of the White House complex and immediately light up a smoke after meeting with J.D. Vance, and then talked about how worried they were. I mean, how worried should we be?
No, they should be worried. This is obviously a negotiating tactic, but I cannot figure out what the logical end result is that the U.S. wants to achieve through that negotiating tactic. Because as I said before, they can achieve all the security and economic outcomes that they want within NATO, within their existing bilateral agreement with Denmark. So this whole thing doesn't make a lot of sense. So yeah, we should be worried because of an unpredictable Trump regime, and because, as I said, the whole thing doesn't make sense. But the French president and the French foreign minister, I'd say, they're also have been the last few years seizing every opportunity to reinforce France's leadership role within Europe. And I think that's part of the posturing, positioning you're seeing now from the French. The other interesting thing from a NATO nerd perspective is when they're talking about it, they're talking about Greenland as EU territory and how we would never let somebody attack EU territory. And yet the EU doesn't defend EU territory. NATO does. So they're, choosing to position France the way they've always positioned France, as a leader in the continent who prioritizes the EU ahead of NATO.
Just one last quick question. You say this, logical outcome and approach here. Maybe it's psychological, and I'm not throwing that word out by accident, because President Trump did an interview with 4 reporters from the New York Times, and he said, psychologically, I don't want to just lease the land, because he's a real estate guy, I want to own it. And that's how he feels more secure in terms of the fortress North America, I guess, that he's trying to build. So that, I'm guessing, based on what the Danes and the Greenlanders had to say, that's what they were told. It sure seems that that's the core message conveyed to them.
Well, if only international law around self-determination of indigenous peoples, or equality of states, or inviolability of sovereignty were to have an impact on those kind of psychological impulses. But the problem is that just by posing the question this way, it's just handing a big gift to Vladimir Putin, honestly. It's undercutting NATO already, because there is, there are questions being raised about the U.S. commitment to collective defense of all NATO territories, including Greenland. So it's delightful to see NATO allies squabbling over something like this. It's delightful to Putin, and probably a little bit to China as well.
Kerry Buck, former Canadian ambassador to NATO, we always appreciate the perspective. Thanks for giving us some time today.
Thanks very much, David. Bye-bye.